Good afternoon, and welcome to the MIT System Design and Management Program's webinar series on systems thinking. Our webinar speaker today is Ananda Chowdhury from Merck, where he is Director of Organizational Strategy, Management, and Operations. Today he'll be speaking on using quality by design and systems thinking in developing, commercializing, and life cycle management of medicines and vaccines. Ananda, it's all yours.
Thanks a lot, Lois. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. It's a pleasure to be talking to all of you about this topic. I'd like to really open up with the thesis that quality by design is merely a set of terms that we use in the pharmaceutical, biologics, and vaccine development space, really when we're talking about systems thinking. And what it really is the evolution of systems thinking and the adoption of systems thinking in this space. And I'd like to speak to you about that. I am in the organization that's called Global Science, Technology, and Commercialization. I'm the head of strategy for that organization within Merck. And we're really tasked with the late-stage commercialization, industrialization of pharmaceuticals and other products, as well as the inline technical support of once that product has made it to market. So that's the mission of our organization, and we work in partnership with the Merck research laboratories to bring new products to market. Okay? So for our agenda today, I'd like to begin with just a brief, and I have the exclamation point because it is going to be very brief. I could probably talk about 24 hours or so about drug development itself, but we'll give a brief overview of drug development for those who are getting introduced to that process. We'll talk about this transformation, which is quality by design, and really the adoption of systems thinking in the drug development space. And we'll talk a little bit about how the steps that Merck is taking to enhance our own models internally and with our external partners on quality by design, and share with you a couple of specific examples and outcomes that we've been able to achieve by this adoption. So let's start with, how does drug development work? At a very high level, this diagram here, which is adapted from the FDA website, really shows you the basic steps. And the 5 basic steps really are at the very beginning, basic research, to the design of a prototype or discovery of a particular mechanism that attacks a particular disease or disease type by therapeutic category, going into preclinical development, which involves the in vitro and animal testing of a particular potential product, then finally moving into the clinical development phase, where we actually test the safety and the efficacy of this potential product in human subjects, which then eventually, after a rigorous set of scientific hurdles, we're prepared to sort of file what's called a new drug application, or an NDA, with a regulatory authority, and awaiting approval, at which point we're able to then make that product available commercially. Okay, so these are the basic steps, and I'd like to point out the 3 major work streams that go behind this. The first is, as I mentioned, you must demonstrate that the product that you are looking to and that's attacking a particular disease area is actually safe. That the first hurdle is safety, and that you're not getting adverse effects from the introduction of this drug. And so that's the first hurdle. Then we look at this medical utility, which is sometimes summarized as efficacy. We're looking at whether the actual new chemical entity that we're looking at targets the disease is actually effective in comparison to a control group. And lastly, this is the area where my organization specifically focuses. This is called industrialization, and it is actually the physical product design. It is looking at, if we're talking about a solid oral dosage form, what does the tablet look like? how is it constructed, what is contained within the formulation, how must we design that formulation to give it a certain pharmacokinetic profile to make sure that that drug is indeed medically effective as well as safe. Along with that, we also look at all of the various other aspects of design, which include the packaging to make sure that the drug itself is maintained and is intact. We look at the design of the actual supply chain, as well as the manufacturing processes that go behind how the actual drug is manufactured. So these are the three main work streams, and actually all drug companies have a certain part and piece of this and the associated models to carry these elements through, okay? I'd like to say that this very process that's generically represented in the diagram above, we do have adaptations of that we then use as business process maps that help guide the enterprise through every single step of the drug development process, all the way to the point where we're actually able to take the drug off the market at some point in the future when we have new drugs available and the drug is no longer viable. So this is a very long process, and many of you have likely heard that this can take on the order of 12 to 18 years to get from the very first identification of a potential target, which is in that early discovery phase, all the way out to when a drug is actually available for market use. So I'll move to, from that high-level overview of drug development, where we go from molecules to initial candidates to targets to in vitro testing to animal testing to then actual small populations of humans to large populations of humans, what we call phase 3, et cetera, trials, to oftentimes outcome studies, to then finally having a product that's commercially available. In that process, we have sort of two states that are working semi in parallel. And one I'll call the traditional system, okay, the traditional system that really finds its roots in the in the 1950s, et cetera, from which a lot of the principles of drug development were based and formulated. And there is that traditional system, and then what we call the desired state, the state that we'd like to sort of leapfrog to. And I would argue that that state is the one that is fully adopting of the system thinking approach that we call quality by design. So this diagram helps to represent the traditional state and the desired future state by virtue of some attributes. This is a picture that was developed by Dr. Mohad Nasser, who is the head of the reviewers in the Center for Drug Evaluation Research, or CDER, at the FDA. And Dr. Nasser sort of describes the traditional system by some of these attributes. This is not fully descriptive, but here are a couple of things to look for. In our traditional system, we test in quality. We inspect quality in. So all of the work has been done, and when we reach a final formulation or tablet, we look at how that behaves and make sure that that is of absolutely the highest quality. But the places where we could have acted on that has passed, and so the only choice that's left to us at that point is to discard things that don't meet that quality. We really were looking at a place where we collected tremendous amounts of scientific data. However, oftentimes it was data without a lot of context and information behind it, sort of the big picture aspect. What is this telling us about the behavior of the drug in totality? We did do a lot of our setting of specifications of our drugs based on batch analysis and process history. So in other words, we looked at the ability to control the process in the past and what our associated variation was without a regard to what is truly the specification that's needed based on the patient needs and the patient outcomes that we're looking at. So we sort of over-constrained the process, if you will, to a very, very high level that was probably not scientifically justified in many cases. It was over-constraining and thus highly rigid. Going to that, we also had frozen processes. In other words, once we filed a process, we really looked at saying, we don't want to make any sorts of changes, even those that may improve efficiency, may improve or reduce the amount of waste that we produce from a process. If we had some activities that made a process more environmentally friendly or greener, it was very difficult to enact those changes. And lastly, we really looked at making sure that our processes were reproducible, not necessarily fully robust to all of the sources of variation. So it was really saying, how can we control every possible environmental outcome that we could have in this process, and make sure we controlled all the sources of variation, rather than saying, can we actually attack the product in the process and make it more robust to variation. So that's where we were. I'll sort of say that's kind of the past. And I would sort of argue that most of our industry has sort of moved away from this past. Okay, but we've not fully gone to this desired state that we're talking about. And what does this desired state look like? This desired state is really a place where quality is assured first and foremost by the design of the product and the process, not necessarily by end product testing and inspection. We really look at knowledge-rich submissions to our regulatory agencies, where we really support the product and the process design and the logic and the science behind it in a much more holistic fashion. Our specifications would be based on product performance requirements, and we would have, so really tracing back what our process is doing all the way back to what's important for the physician and the patient when they're looking at the drug and using it. Looking at flexible processes within the design space so that we can actually continuously improve. We have opportunities to make a process greener, less wasteful, more yield intensive, then we can actually indeed operate within and make some changes. And lastly, we really focus on robustness. And this becomes important later when I speak about the new customers that we're going to be serving in the future. We're really looking, certainly at Merck, how can we bring the best of what we have offered in the past to our existing markets, really expand that access to really all of the world's people. And that means that we are going to be serving customers and patients in places where we haven't traditionally gone before. We have certain pockets of excellence and examples where we've been able to provide access to some of our life-saving medicines in areas such as sub-Saharan Africa and other places. But I wouldn't say that that's been a systemic solution. Those have been one-off successes. What we're looking at here is how can we make our products robustly available to a very, very large population across the world. Okay? And that's going to entail that our products need to be robust to all sorts of variation. So that's the desired future state. And how do we get there? Well, what we're saying there is that desired future state is really what we're calling quality by design in totality. It's a holistic system. And here's a definition. You know, in systems design and management, we like operational definitions. And this is a definition that was forwarded by the ICH. The ICH is a group and the acronym stands for the International Conference on Harmonization. It's a group of folks who, from industry and regulators, who get together and provide guidances on drug development and biologics and vaccines development so that we can all reach a common level of performance. So here's the definition of quality by design. It's a systematic approach to development that begins with predefined objectives and emphasizes product and process understanding and process control based on sound science and quality risk management. Now, if I took this definition and applied it to many of the systems problems that we look at today, I would probably reach a similar definition. So what we're really looking at is if we're talking about predefined objectives, we're really looking at what is the big why. What are we concerned about? What is the customer, in our case the patient, the physician, the provider, the nurse, what are they looking for in terms of our system solution? And then ultimately integrating that into what is the transfer function to the little X's that influence that big Y? What is the function that we're designing to provide those predefined objectives, those predefined outcomes that we're looking for? And in the world of pharmaceutical development, we call the big Y the critical quality attributes, or the CQAs, and we call the little X's the CPPs, or the critical process parameters. And we're trying to look for those relationships between CQAs and CTPs and really understand that F, the function, that works on the CTPs to deliver the CQAs that we're looking for. A bigger picture and a mental picture that can help you kind of get to this is, so what are we really talking about? When we're designing a pharmaceutical product and process, what we're really creating is what's called a design space, okay? And a design space is really a multi-dimensional combination and of interactions of input variables. For instance, material attributes, raw material suppliers even. It could be processing temperatures. It could be the risk of sort of environmental excursions that we would see. So all of these items are sort of inputs. And then they're related to these outputs that we're talking about, which really are the items that really determine whether we have a quality, safe, and effective product. So in our work, in the work of our organization, we've tried to strive to really define a knowledge base. A knowledge base is really everything that we know about the particular product and the process. Within that knowledge base is contained something that we call the design space. That's the space where we actually know that if we operate in that particular arena, we will actually come out with a quality product, okay, that it will actually be safe, effective, and of high quality. Within that design space, we have something that's called the normal operating ranges. These are the spaces that we really feel that in order to not necessarily scurry all the way out to the edges of the design space, we really want to keep within a particular operating range that we really feel is a robust position to operate. This is the place where we are well within the design space, and we're taking on really a stable point in that design space where we really feel that product, we can really assure the quality of what we're delivering here. And that's our whole challenge. The whole QbD paradigm is to say, how do we take knowledge space, how do we then carve out a design space, and then how do we make those effective system-level decisions on normal operating ranges? And we can really do that by a variety of different tools that will be familiar to systems thinkers, but they can be multivariate experimentation through DOEs, through modeling and simulation, or first principles understanding. But the real crux of this change in thinking is the fact that we're considering the whole system. We have to look at the whole system and consider that when we're really coming up with this design space, okay? So when we look at these things, what we're really talking about is a transformation, okay? And that at first begins with a mindset. It begins with a mindset change. How do we transform our traditional system of development to this quality by design systems thinking-based system? And so we're doing two things. We're sort of looking at the business processes, the technologies, and all of those things that are required. But we also need to look at the parts that are associated with the right brain, the culture of the organization, the mindsets that are there, the philosophies, the mental models that exist within the organization. And in order to embody all of the software that one could find, particularly from sources like MIT and other places and other thinkers, what we've come up with is this thing called the systems design model. And the crux of the systems design model is really to say that when you're going through this massive transformational change, what you're really looking to do is co-design these 6 blue circles. You're really looking to say what are the combinations of business process, governance and structures, information, knowledge, people, technology and assets, and the algorithm for continuous improvement that I can co-optimize and co-vary to reach the results that I'm looking for, okay? And this system design model is really based on a lot of the system thinking principles. Primarily, if you look at this, you're really looking at some things that really appeal to the left brains of us, the technologies, the business processes, et cetera, as well as you're looking at some of the right brain aspects, which are the culture, some of the governance, and when we say governance, we mean, and structures, we mean all of the team structures and the associated organizational models, and corporate governance, et cetera, that could be out there. And this one, which is really important, this is the adaptation function. It is how do you purposefully look at how your particular organization assesses the fitness function that's out there. How must it then meet that fitness function in the current state, and how must it look ahead to say what is the fitness function of the future, and how can I adapt my 6 blue circles to meet that new fitness function. So it's really looking at that purposeful, proactive adaptation for the future. Okay, so and all of these 6 circles are really born of an assessment of the customer and the external requirements, and then boiling that down into strategies, the guiding principles, the missions, the visions, then the capabilities, and then looking at those 6 circles. So I'd like to take you quickly through some of the ways that we've looked at the quality by design transformation and stepped through this model. Okay, so the first is how do we actually begin changing some of the information, the business processes, and the technology and assets. Here, we went back to the tried and true fundamentals of systems engineering. We went back and said, how would we take a systems design management approach to developing a new pharmaceutical? And we really, and I'm going to build this out here, and these are actual extracts from an actual project that kind of went from concept, design, optimize, verify, and control through the standard steps of systems engineering. Starting with, at the very top, identifying the customer needs, flowing those requirements down into the design phase. And these are all done in close partnership with our marketing colleagues and with a lot of external input from the patient and the provider and the payer. Getting down to the design, what is the actual detailed design of the system, probably several flow downs down into the actual manufacturing and processing steps, and looking at how we control and mitigate risk throughout those processing steps, doing things like MSAs, et cetera. Once that design is done, how do we then optimize it and actually create prototypes where we pressure test that, come up with a final robust solution, and then finally implement and verify the control, the very robust control of this in a manufacturing facility. What we did is we said, look, we need to not reinvent the wheel here. We need to go back to the fundamentals of systems engineering and port over some of the tried and true tools and techniques that have been used, and then apply them to pharmaceutical development, and we've done that. The next step then is to go from those business processes and technologies to then say, how do we then transform the culture, the governance, and the people, and how do we then manage that change process through time to embed quality by design into our work? And this is something where we went back to some lessons of human behavior and how human behaviors are kind of influenced and how they work during change. So a couple of principles that we kept in mind. First is humans are notoriously bad at knowing what they want. So particularly if the application of the mindset and the methodology is really new, you can't just ask a human to say, is this good or bad? So you need visceral examples. We then also remember that humans have a very hard time switching behaviors from what they're used to. And if you have a new alternative, the new alternative must be really compelling. And in some cases, and this is a sort of a rough approximation of work done by folks like Daniel Kahneman and others around behavioral economics, that the alternative must be 2 to 3 times better than the status quo that you have at the moment. And that goes for even systems related to quality by design. Not all humans are created equal, and different folks and different populations and segments have different speeds of adoption for particular changes. So we needed to consider that to say who are the early adopters, who are kind of in the critical mass in the middle, and then who are going to really need to be convinced of these changes. And then finally, that humans don't just evolve to a new state. That in other words, as a system evolves, the expectations for humans also evolve, and so there's this co-evolution between the technology, the physical technologies, and the social and management and administrative technologies along with the people who then interact with those technologies. And you sort of co-evolve through time, and you have to expect that and sort of design your change efforts that way. So if you look at that, what we really moved to, and we said we need a holistic change of our model from our traditional sort of pre-2006, pre-quality by design model to this current model. And what we said was in the old model, we really had this issue where we had this deep divide between the Merck research laboratories or the research areas and the manufacturing areas, where while we did great work, it was through a lot of handoffs. There was this huge transfer of knowledge and technology from research to manufacturing. And what we've done since 2006 is actually created a whole model that really focuses in on speed from the research to the supply organization, making sure that knowledge is not lost. It's actually amplified through time. And so we've introduced what's called the commercialization space right in the center here. So in these steps, research will be really focused on finding those novel solutions for critical patient needs. The commercialization space would be taking those novel solutions and scaling them up and making sure that we were applying quality by design. And then in supply, when we actually look at supplying the market, we'd say, are we doing the best we can on cost? Is there a way that we can provide the same benefit to other patients at a lower cost and certainly thus enabling a lot of access, because a lot of access is connected to the cost of the actual drug. So while the focus is there on these different portions during development, we would have an end-to-end focus on patient and customer needs and the quality of the product. So where have we been in this transformation? It's nice to have it on the slide, but what we've done is we've had this purposeful ladder through time, and these represent the years and our sort of association with quality by design up until this kind of 2010, 2011 timeframe, where early on in 2005 we engaged in what the FDA had as it was called a pilot program, a quality by design pilot program, where the FDA really opened it up to industry to participate in a pilot program to bring the best of their science to that and then really explore this systems thinking approach together, okay? And that was a great milestone for us, because the product called Januvia, which is a therapy for type 2 diabetes, was actually put in the pilot program in 2005, and we were able to really look at some of these systems thinking concepts by virtue of that, and we had some tremendous success there. Novel approaches that had been approved so far in over 80 countries across the world. Really great drug. But even after those successes, now we face the internal change. It was bringing those successes back, which were created by a critical few individuals, and then saying, going back into the organization, the larger organization, and really engaging them in that success. And the question we got most of the time is, should we do this? Is this really something that we want to systemically change the way we do business to adopt quality by design and systems thinking as an approach? With that, and that took a better part of a year to discuss that. In 2007, we went from that to that initial work, that change work that we did, to saying, okay, we need to develop a strategy here. It went from should we do it to how do we do it? How do we actually change the framework to adopt this? And we spent the better part of 2007, 2008 establishing what we call an execution framework, selectively developing capability and standard tools. It was at this time that I fortuitously got exposed to some of the systems design and management thinking, and to say, you know, we need to adopt some of these elements into how we transform our organization within Merck to really have the tools, the techniques, the mindset, the methodologies, and really operationalize these changes so people have a visceral way of doing these things. It's not just conceptual, it's not just philosophical. And so with that adoption of the SDM approach, we were able to then institutionalize all throughout 2009, whereby every single product in our pipeline goes through the quality by design approach. And then we're really now at a new stage. We really feel that we're moving to realization in the new Merck. As many of you have probably read or know about, Merck and Schering Plough, two very large and successful medicine and healthcare companies. We merged recently, and we call this the new Merck. And what we're now doing is making the quality by design approach ubiquitous across the larger organization. We have a very large and global footprint. We want to ensure that every single thing that we develop and work on follows this mindset, these methodologies, and these tools, okay? So harmonizing the enterprise is a huge effort. The solution exists in the enterprise, but it's a matter of adopting that solution across the enterprise and doing it systemically and in an invariant way, okay? So we're there, and we're really looking forward to the next phase of the challenge, which I'll talk about coming up. So what are some results? So I'd like to maybe share just a small, and I want to sort of emphasize that this is for the purposes of making this very visceral. There are several examples. I picked one out that is related to the product I spoke of before. So we needed to design a larger system for a new product that was under development. And as a part of that product, there was a subsystem, which is how do we measure, as we process the drug through time, the quality of that drug, so that if there was a part piece in that process step that we could sort of actively control to or make changes to make sure that the product quality at the end came out well, so sort of control the process at the point of control, that we would do that. And so we started to engage in some study of what's called process analytical technologies and using non-invasive ways to look at how the product quality is evolving through the different process steps. So this diagram, and I'll sort of briefly describe for those who are not familiar with drug processing, it sort of describes the three major steps in sort of creating a tableted product in the process called roller compaction. So I'll use this to draw here. These are the three major steps here in the formulation, in the creation of the formulation. It's blending, roller compaction, and compression. So in blending, this is where you take the active pharmaceutical ingredients, you put it in, and for the product I spoke of before, this would be sitagliptin for Januvia, right? It's the thing that actually works on the mechanism. And then you combine that with a bunch of other items like lubricants that help to blend the process, and they actually help for metabolism, other excipients that help with either breaking of the tablet, things that can help with the swallowing of the tablet, etc. So all of these things are blended in together, and what you're really looking for is to assure content uniformity. You don't want clumps of the active in some parts of the tablet, and you don't want clumps of the lubricant in other parts of the tablet, etc. So you kind of want a uniform distribution of all of the materials in the blending step. You then take that into a roller compaction where you actually take that solid powder and then through a certain set of parameters that you control, push them through rolls and create a more uniform blend, which then is compressed into the tablets that we're all familiar with. So in this, what we said is, rather than testing the tablet at the very end when it comes out of the compression step, are there ways to actually measure the extent of blending? And here we've had some fantastic scientists at Merck looking at near-infrared spectroscopy to actually image the blending step and actually use that as a means of control as well as quality to say, okay, the extent of blend has achieved a certain point. And then what we're able to do through tons of scientific studies is demonstrate the fact that that is an adequate means of quality and control, whereby, and it's actually in some cases better than that end process testing. So we were able to implement what's called a real-time release testing process, whereby we didn't have to sit and take every tablet off the line or a sample of the tablets off the line at the very end and test for certain items. We were able to release right upon using the near-IR method and get that out. And this diagram shows the fact that we really moved to that method and included this in sort of a commercial scale. And this is out and being used. So what does that mean then? Just by simple virtue of having that simple subsystem introduced and looking at it from the outside, there were just a couple of operational benefits that we were able to do. By eliminating end product testing, we actually went from sort of batch by batch, needing on the order of 11 some hours to actually test the tablet at the end, to almost a 97% reduction on average on the analyst time per batch. If you looked at the sort of the cycle time per batch, if we used the conventional testing method, we would have somewhere on the order of 7 days. We were able to reduce that by about 42%. The numbers are actually better even now. And then over the course from 2006 to now, we've actually been able to save a lot of just resource savings in the lab itself, right? And that's been going up and up as people have learned the new process and have been going. Now, this is a small sliver of what we've been able to do just from the operations side of it between these three examples. If you then begin to look at this, is when you do this sort of real-time release testing, what you're really doing is you're reducing the amount of inventory that you're keeping, and what you're able to do is then react quickly to inventory changes or demand changes as you go. So with these shorter cycle times, we were able to avoid about half a month of coverage in terms of resulting in over sort of $20 million in savings over 5 years, which is fairly good, and that's from one site, one facility. And then at the same time, that same process, we were able to have 0 process-related atypicals and excursions in 5 years. And this was a fantastic way of saying we were not reacting to what was called common cause variation, what we would look at as common cause variation. This really helped us to target and presuppose any ways, really embodied statistical process control to say these are the things that could get to a place that's going to put us out of specification, and we reacted to those ahead of time. That's fantastic. And lastly, the most important part is, for this particular product, we have sort of lowballed the total sales and the demand of the patient, both with compassionate use as well as sort of commercial use, by about 40%. Had we not done the steps ahead of time through using this QbD approach, we would have probably stocked out. In some cases, the patient would have needed to go on this therapy and would not have had the available drug. And so by using the QbD approach, we were really able to accommodate a massive uptick in that we had not anticipated. So just to go on from that, I think just some of the organizational benefits we've been able to see in going to this quality by design approach, certainly there's a sort of a reduction of capital expenditure. We sort of moved it from these product-specific expenditures, product by product, to going to more platforms and looking at more strategic expenditure. So when you're able to translate patient needs and customer requirements to robust technology solutions, you're then able to make sure those technology solutions are applicable to a broad base of different products. And then what you're doing is not investing on new capital for every single new product that you're having, but rather investing in platforms. And by doing this, we've really gone down to a level that we would almost say is on the order of about $200,000 dollars per new product in capital investment. That's incredibly low in terms of, in comparison to historical pre-investment that we would have done prior to this model. And this number is based off of an N of 7 products that we've done this model with. We've been able to reduce the development resources in the sense of by increasing our productivity on the order of 28% measured, despite a 20% expansion of our pipeline workload. So the pipeline has sort of gone up, but we've been able to keep our headcount stable. So I think that's been through this increase of productivity by using this type of method. We've demonstrated an ability to reduce cycle times and keep off of critical path. So for us, the critical path is really the testing within patients, the clinical development timeline, and how do we make sure that the process, the chemical manufacturing controls part of the work is kept off of that critical timeline, and we've managed to do that 90% of the time. And the times when we haven't done that, it's been in those occasions where we've actually purposefully been on critical path because it is a product that's, say, a product value extension, et cetera, from an existing product. In several cases, we've accommodated 4 to 6 month reductions in filing timelines. One example of that is the HIV/AIDS drug, Icentris, where we, just due to the nature of the drug and the significant medical need across the world, we were able to accelerate the filing of Icentris several months prior to when we were able to, our original timelines were. And lastly, we have now a much more sophisticated and enhanced risk management, risk mitigation approach with QbD, really looking at the total system, not only just the parts that are within the processing step, but also looking at how does this make its way through the total value chain to the hands of the patient. And by the way, how is the patient going to be using it? And do we need to think about environmental controls and all of these other elements in the actual product and process design? So lastly, I'd like to maybe kind of point to where are we going? How do we, the big part about taking results is to say you can't stay static. These 6 bubbles need to adapt and evolve to what the next phase is. And that cycles back to new customer and external requirements that the company needs to meet. And I'd like to point out a couple that we need to worry about. And I'll build this out. Sort of, these are some aspects of the new world and the challenges that we face ahead. The first is really the population. This is a diagram that's taken from the United Nations Population Fund, and this is a 2005 condition where the size of the area that you see here is really representative of the population. So while in terms of geographical area, some of these countries might be smaller than some of the countries that appear larger, you can see already that, say, India and China represent a significant amount of the population of the world. And some of the countries that are what we'll say the bulk of our existing markets in the U.S. and the EU are smaller. And so we need to think about how do we get the medicines that we have for a world that is really looking at this population profile, really. The other thing is this is the Access to Medicine Index, okay, that's developed and is really looking at what companies are really doing the right things to provide access to for life-saving medicines across the world, and there's a bunch of measures here. And so right at this moment, you'll find Merck's kind of at the top, but yet we feel that in total, we don't necessarily have all of the solutions that we're going to need to serve, say, a minimum of an 80% of the world's population by 2015. If we want to get there, that's something that's radical, that's new, and that's groundbreaking that we really need to think about. Last, this shrinking dollar was meant to indicate that really that more and more people, all of us, all stakeholders in this ecosystem are really looking at cost and really trying to say how can we give value for lower costs moving forward. And lastly, many of you are probably familiar with this chart where the purple bars represent the expenditure in sort of novel research and development and trying to find new chemical entities, and the blue line represents the number of accepted drugs or indications by, in this case, the FDA. So as you can see, we've sort of reached a crossover point where the number of approvals are decreasing and the sort of investment has been increasing. So in other words, this is a dwindling R&D productivity piece. And so what we're really trying to say is innovation needs to take multiple forms. Innovation can take the form of, and has to take the form of, investing in those novel approaches, those novel indications, but it can also take the form of how can we get that novel indication out to more patients? How can we get access? How can we get the cost down? How can we get the geographical distribution up? All of these are aspects of the new challenges that we're facing in the future. And so they point to putting all of these elements in a crucible and coming out with the elements of cost, customer, flexibility, globalization and inclusion, and really coming up with really lean execution excellence as the real fitness functions for the future. So what I'd like to say is that QbD, the work, the labor that we've taken in applying this quality by design and systems approach has really set us up to now take these challenges on and adapt. Had we stayed stagnant in 2005 and 2006, when these changes were taking hold, we would not be in a position to really meet this new future. But I think because we took those preemptive steps, we're in a much better situation to adapt and be much more robust to the new future, and in some cases help to shape it. So in closing, I'd like to sort of point out that, you know, quality by design, it's important for us to sort of use the words in the constituencies that hold them dear. So quality by design really is systems thinking in the drug development and pharmaceutical and biologics and vaccine space. And what it really does is it allows the benefits of our science to be taken to sort of a maximum level. We've done fantastic science in the past, and what we're really looking at is to say, how do we really, really take this to the next level and wring the most benefit out of our efforts. The other part that's very important is that transformation. When you're thinking about this whole hog change, you have to attack a series of the organizational components simultaneously. It's not just about the technology and the assets or even the processes, but it includes the structures that you have behind it and the people, the hearts and the minds, and how you influence that people and thinking very purposefully about how you're going to drive the adoption of that new system throughout your organization. And lastly, I'd like to point out again, without the investments we've made in adopting systems thinking, we would be ill-equipped for the massive changes ahead that face us, face healthcare, and face our industry. Okay? So I'd like to just quickly end with a couple of acknowledgments, obviously. So one, all of this work was done by a group that's called the Quality by Design Realization Team, led by Dr. Erica Huja. And I've been a proud member of that team for a while, and it's been a phenomenal experience. The leader of our organization is Mike Thien. He's also been an advocate and sponsor of systems thinking. Luke Schenk, who provided a lot of the science work that we saw in some of these presentations, and a cast of others within Merck. And of course, I'd like to thank MIT and SDM for affording me this opportunity, especially Pat and Lois for making this available and for me to talk to you today. Okay, so I'd like to maybe leave some time for some questions and some discussion, and thank you all for your attention. And I'll turn it over to Lois.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, please use the chat, or can we use audio?
Yeah, they should be able to raise. There's a button underneath the participants list that'll allow you to raise your hand, and we can call on you and unmute you. You can ask your question directly. Ananda, can you see the question from Gordon Johnson?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Sure.
See here.
He asks, will the charts be available? I had to join the call late.
Yeah, I think we're planning on doing that, right?
Yes, we will be posting a link to the the presentation and, excuse me, a recorded version of the webinar later today. And we will also send an email out to all participants so that you can access them quickly and easily. Any other questions? Okay. Yes?
Christopher Hoffman, excuse me? Hello?
Go ahead.
Christopher Hoffman asks, on slide 9, following through CDOC process, was this part of normal process or new based on this QbD process?
So I think CI is probably, are you reading the question, I'm sorry, are you reading the question that's on the screen, or is this a different question?
Yes, it's on the screen. Are you able to see it, Anando? I can resend it.
How does QbD fit? I see the question says, does QbD fit within the greater CI initiative at Merck? Okay. And so that's the question, right?
Yes.
I'm seeing on my screen. Okay. So CI, for the acronym there stands for customer input, okay? And the customer input initiative at Merck is really, it's sort of looking at the problem through sort of 3 different dimensions. One is, how do we better read the needs of the end customer, the true end customer, which is the patient, and then also the primary healthcare provider, which in most cases is a physician or a nurse, and in other cases actually can be a family member who advises on health issues. How do we take those signals and make sure that we have a very, very visual connection to those signals all the way back into all the part pieces and portions of Merck, making sure that we're really, really using that signal in its purest form to really attenuate what we're trying to do inside. So that's the customer input process. Quality by design is absolutely tied and tethered to that customer input process. As a matter of fact, one of the artifacts that's created there is called, or is done with the customer input, is called the Target Product Profile, the TPP. That artifact, TPP, helps to connect all of the other development and process development organizations, connects it right to the target product profile, which is then connected to that external signal I was talking about, which is the patient and the customer need. So we've worked really hard to make sure that the customer input process and initiative is hardwired into everything that QbD is about, and I think we've had some fairly good success. Any other questions?
Do you want to read that?
Yes, Ananda. We have a few more questions posted in the chat. Kyle Hansen says, unfortunately, I missed your introduction. What have you found to be the most useful resources for understanding the application of QbD to an organization?
So the most useful resources, I think, I would say maybe it's not a resource, but it's probably a way to break the problem down, okay? What you're really looking at is to say, you know, people who think very deeply about you know, systems level changes like quality by design tend to have married a lot of the different concepts in their minds together and have spent a lot of time soaking in that and are able to quickly see the interconnections between different mindsets and different part pieces. What you need to begin to do is, as you're introducing these novel concepts, is how can I break those connections that I've made and through my personal journey down to what I would almost call a knowledge map. It's to say, I know this because of this. Well, I know that because of this other thing. And I know that because I learned this one thing. And when you begin to break it down, you get down to the core set of fundamental principles which, upon examination, you might find vary greatly from where people have and where their mental models, current mental models are, okay? For instance, I'll use a simple example. The difference between specification limits and control limits is an important one. To say, if a process is varying within a certain set and you're able to characterize that variation, what you're usually talking about are control limits. A lot of folks have the mental model that says, well, those should then in turn be your specification limits. And that's a very fundamental first-order thing that you need to sort of understand and break, that conception, to say, oh, what we're really saying is, no, specification limits are really set by true customer needs and patient needs. And those can differ as long as your control limits and your variation is well within your specification limits, you have a robust process. And it's that sort of boiling it down to that single capsular concept that's been very, very helpful. So we've done this, the resource, I would say, or the tool we've used is knowledge mapping. It's taking the larger concepts and being able to break them down into those small elements that you then need to drive throughout your organization. Because if you switch those atom-level concepts, you will then have the fundamental building blocks to drive systemic change across the organization.
Okay, we have time for one more question. This comes from Vincent Balgos. Can you just scroll up, please, so I can see that? Okay, how does QDB adapt to the imminent changes coming from the FDA in terms of drug and medical approval processes with particular interest in verification and testing?
Mm-hmm. So that's when we think of, that's a great question. When we think about where we're headed in terms of what we're looking for, we really need to look at all of the various what we'll call hurdles of evidence, right? And we want to make sure that the hurdles of evidence that we put out there are absolutely 100% scientifically sound. And that then begins to say, what is it going to take? What are the scientific hurdles that we need to put in front of us that assures that we're assuring safety, we're assuring efficacy, and we're assuring that from a scientific and manufacturing perspective we can deliver a robust quality again and again. And what I think the questioner is referring to is the fact that series, we're moving to a realm where in the past we would have used something called surrogate markers, which are indicators of efficacy, and because of the impact of our drugs to those surrogate markers, we could relate the efficacy of the impact of the drug to the ultimate disease. So in moving forward, we're looking at a world where we're having a lot of emphasis on what's called outcome studies or outcomes research, where we're actually looking at the true measured health benefits. So for instance, if we're talking about an osteoporotic drug, rather than measuring bone density, which would be a surrogate marker, we're looking at actually the measurement of the reduction of actual fractures within a patient in a population. So you can see that the quality by design process is engineered for either. It can actually take those two inputs and say, if we really actually want to design for fractures and design for bone density, can we relate those two? Are those the two big whys that our processes need to be driven by? And we can adapt our designs to either of those and make sure that we're providing a causal link between those two. And that's really where we're poised to do, and we're actually excited because I think QbD presents the opportunity to have a much richer discussion on coming up with these linkages between the actual patient outcomes and the surrogate markers and the processing changes that we can influence.
Okay, Anando, thank you very much. This was extremely interesting. Thank you all for coming. As mentioned earlier, I will be sending a link out to the presentation slides and the recorded version of this webinar. I'd like to invite you to come to our next webinar, which is Monday, May 9th. The topic is Systems Thinking and the Development of a Large-Scale Secure Network for Comparative Effectiveness Healthcare Research. And if you've attended this webinar, you're now on our email list. If anyone has any questions that weren't answered today, feel free to email them to me and I will forward them to Anando. Anando, thank you again, and everyone else, thanks again for coming.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.